Welcome everybody. I'm Robin, part of Radical Restart, and I'm here with Megan and May. And this is our live stream, after we've got the audio sorted, on we need to talk about school. Both Megan and May are part of the education crew within Radical Restart. Radical Restart is a youth activism space that we've set up to try and start creating inter-organizational, inter-movement conversations across all of these amazing emergent youth movements that have started up, so that we can start questioning a number of key things that we think are vital if young people are going to push forward in this time and create transformative change. So there's a few of these. The first one is youth. There's also solidarity. There's how movements work. But the one we're focusing on today is education, and especially around the schooling system and how the schooling system plays out at the moment to not allow things like transformative youth movements to happen, or how it works in terms of quashing them or changing their ability to have real effect. And so this live stream, this webinar, is our opportunity to bring these conversations out of Radical Restart into the mainstream and push on from there. And invite, one of the big things we're trying to do is invite conversation, communication around these. So the structure of this is we've got 3 questions. The panelists, us 3, will go through these, we'll chat a little bit. Hopefully it will inspire some thoughts and ideas in yourselves. Throw stuff down in the comments as we go, and then we'll ask some of your questions at the end. Megan disappeared, but now she's back. We're just learning this is new, but hopefully the level of conversation will make up for the lack of professionality. And anyway, we're young people. Who gives a shit about professionality? The point is that we're trying to change the world, not that we're wearing suits and ties. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to jump straight into it. And that means that there's the first question, and then I'll let one of Megan and May jump in and answer it. So the first question we've got is very simple, very open. Why is it important to talk about and create changes in the current education system, and especially as young activists? Who wants to jump in on this one? May, do you want to go first?
You're muted.
Meg, take it away.
Okay, Megan, why is it important?
All right. Sorry, I ran off. It's because my neighbour started mowing their lawn, so I thought it'd be a bit noisy. Yeah. So why is it important to talk about school? Well, I guess the obvious thing is that we all, like almost every young person, goes through a schooling system, you know, and like that's, you know, it's in like really formative years in someone's life. And we have this idea that school is neutral, you know, that it's just like you come out of it as an adult and, you know, ready for the world, whatever. But so much evidence that we can see, you know, everything from the level of like dropouts and school exclusions through to like the mental health crisis, and, you know, the obvious things like how messed up it is that we don't talk about, you know, colonialism in a history classroom. All of those things are obvious for me, like obvious indicators of how it's not a neutral system. It's something that, you know, shapes how young people see the world. And I guess for me, the thing is that, you know, the way the world is now is not something I really like, and I want to change it. And so I think that a good place to start is school, because that, you know, so like informs how young people see the world when they come out of school.
Definitely.
100%.
May, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, she's got it all there. The idea, I think, is really important. Like that, out of everything, especially when we think about us as children, we all, I mean, most of us anyway, school would have been is a massive, massive part of your life. Like when, just because me and Meg we recently just left year 13, and when now I know that I never have to go back there in my life. The amount of energy which goes into the same instant, and 5 days a week for like what 15 years of your life, like at least, and like that's a lot of time. And so that shapes you as a person, that shapes what you're interested in, and that shapes, like Meg said, that's the values which you assess and like understand the world. And if that's not right, or if that's not equal and it's someone else's set of values, then we're all going to just be fucked up in the head. So yeah, we need to sort it out.
Yeah, Meg, jump in.
Just yeah, like a cool thing off that, I've got a friend who talks about something called the overt and covert curriculum, but it's basically the idea that if you think about like May said, how many hours we spend in school. And then afterwards, who remembers the content of those lessons exactly? You know, obviously, if you really love like a certain lesson, you'll remember things. But what you mainly come out of school is not a knowledge of like really an understanding of chemistry or whatever. The thing you come out of school with is an understanding of how the world works. You know, that you need to compete with people to be the best. That, you know, either you're smart or you're dumb because you excelled in this specific, you know, measurement of how clever someone is. You know, all those things is that like the covert curriculum, the things that you learn which aren't, you know, explicitly actually in the lessons.
100%.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree. I think for me, one of the biggest things about school is just that it's just the fact that we don't talk about it. We have so many issues that people are on the left, for example, in society. So people who are trying to bring about, for example, justice-based change. We talk, and at the moment there's a massive conversation in society about how we don't talk about racism. Yeah, we have to talk about white supremacy if we're going to push towards a society where white supremacy doesn't mean. And for me, one of the big lessons there is just that you have to talk about things. Like, we live in a democracy, and the idea behind a democracy is that everyone talks about what you're doing. And yet, as young people, we spend, 15 years, 14 years in mainstream education. Lots of us go on to university. And how many times do they ever ask you to just be like, do you understand what you're doing here? Why you're doing it? How we've structured school? Do you have any ideas about how we could do it? Is there any like invitation to be critical about what you're doing? And if there isn't any invitation, how are we expecting young people to, you know, be critical about the world, to come with their own ideas, to keep hold of their imaginations? And especially, and Meg, you referenced it, like in the moment now, you know, we have untold number of crises, whether it's the political crises, the climate crisis, you know, the racist crisis, all of these different things. And at least for me, as a young activist, if you have a crisis of situations, to get out of it, you need a crisis of ideas. You need an absolute blossoming of imagination and excitement. And I feel like school, because it doesn't tell you to look at things critically, especially it, kills people's imaginations to the point where if we don't change it, we won't be able to think our way out of some of the problems we have right now. We'll have a whole nother generation. You know, I'm thinking lots of climate activism, and they're like, you know, we've got to save the world for the next generation. But while they're doing it, that whole generation's having their brains killed by totally uncritical, you know, hierarchical, exam-based, heavy assessment schooling. And it's just like,
Yeah.
So that's why I didn't really talk about it, because no one seems to be talking about it. Sorry, I squeaked.
It's just like,
does someone want to jump back in? Go, Meg.
People always say that, like, you know, people always say, oh, well, why are you trying to change the world by, like, sitting in the road? Like, you need to get a degree, get a good job so you can, like, change things from the inside, you know, get whatever, influential position. But for me, it's like, you look back at how change has been created in the past, especially in the face of, like, opposition, like, from the state or from whoever. You know, it's never, you know, I mean, obviously, like, in some cases, but it's rarely the professionals and the, you know, the politicians who bring about that change. It's the people who actually care and, like, emotionally invest and start just taking action because they know that they can't sit back. And for me, it's like, school teaches you that the only way to succeed at anything is to get a good education. And obviously, you know, school does provide, in some cases, like, you know, opportunities for people where they're not often given them in society. But that doesn't mean that, you know, if that's what school is really there for, it doesn't do a very good job of it, to be honest, because we still have that issue. And so I think it's like reassessing what school is actually telling us and like what the situation is right now.
May?
Especially considering that that in a sense it's like this sort of kind of like it's like a sort of double horrible thing, because in a sense school doesn't prepare you for life, and like the idea which Meg was talking about before, which I've experienced and been told by many people, that to change the system you have to buy into it and change it from the inside. And what they always miss out is that means that you have to buy into their values and you have to pretend to be part of the system to be able to change it, because otherwise you don't get let in. And like, I just think that school and so many people, I mean, I recently had a another like web conference with this incredible journalist, Anthea Lee, something that I'm like looking to maybe go into in the future. And she basically told us that no, it's nothing like the world outside is nothing like uni, nothing. And that's even just in a professional sense. I mean, we know that in like other senses it's even bigger. So yeah, exactly.
Well, this goes into question 2. So I'll flip that one on the screen now so people can see it. And we'll jump into that. So question 2 is, what are your major issues with the current education system? And if you can, how do you think these link to bigger social issues? Who wants to jump in there? I know we've just touched on it a little bit. Or shall I go first? Yes, I'm going to go first. So May, I think one of the things you were saying there about there's such a disconnect now between education and the rest of the world. Like, even if it's just about the fact that our education system isn't properly educating people to enter the workplace, even if that's your whole idea, it's still failing at the only thing it's trying to do. I have so many friends who came out of uni a couple of years ago, and there is like 10% of them are working in a field related to what they did. You know, they've all been forced into precarious jobs, into spaces where they're like in that, you know, thing of saving money for a little bit, going traveling, saving money, go for traveling. You know, it's like a precarious life that isn't based on the thing that they were sold for so many years was their passion. So there's like this big disconnect happening. But I think deeper than that, there's a disconnect that school deliberately teaches young people, where it tells you over and over again that you're not part of the real world. I don't know how many people out there can like feel this with me, but how many times have you been told like, oh, it'll be hard when you're in the real world. It'll be hard, you know, once you're having to do, you know, real things. So enjoy what you're doing now, yeah? But what we're literally telling young people there is that their personhood, their agency, their ideas, their consciousness has nothing to do with the real world, yeah? They're like learning as if they're in this whatever embryonic bubble that pops when you become 18 and you have the chance to enter the real world. Like a school is a portal outside of the real world. And so how are we going to inspire young people to be politically active, democratically important, push change, if they're taught that they don't even exist in the real world? Yeah. And then we can talk about all the ways in which our society, you know, kicks kids off streets, puts in like buzzing alarms, so we don't want young people places. But I think this key thing with school that is so annoying to me is how it teaches you that you don't exist in the real world, and the only way to gain access to the real world is, like you've said so eloquently, is to do the steps that they've told you to do. Yeah. Do your exams, go to university, do all these things, and then you can exist as a person. But what? I exist right now, you know? Obviously I do, I'm old. But other people do. Yeah, May, jump in.
Yeah, just adding on to that, it brings to mind, like, even what I was just talking about, like, the idea that the what do you want to do when you're older question. And this idea, and I remember once going to, in year 11, so 16, who the hell knows what they want to do with their life at 16-year-old? Like, first, there's that. But also this idea that you're presented with a list of careers, and it's not, and it's like you have to do something that you're passionate about, you know, because you can't get bored, but also it needs to make some good money, like whether it's competitive or not. Is it a stable job? Like, does it even exist? And this idea that we're literally told from 16 that we need to pick something, and like what the position that me and Meg are both in now, sorry to make this personal again, but like where we, for the first time in our lives, actually don't have someone sitting there 5 days a week telling us you have to do this, is incredible. And it means that checklist isn't like, our world exists so much more outside of that checklist, but you're presented with that checklist at 16, and that's also part of the reason why some people say, no, I'm out, and then they fail the education system, or more like the education system fails them, I would say.
Yeah, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it all ties back to like this. I've recently been learning about like the origins of mass education, like in the UK. And if you look at where the idea of like educating all, young people came from, they literally designed it. And there's like evidence on this. If you don't believe me, you can go look it up. But like evidence that like they introduced schooling systems to get people used to working in factories. So that's why we have alarms in schools. And that's why, like the people sit how they do at the desk, and all of these things. It's about getting people ready to work in a factory environment. And, obviously people will be like, well, now, what are you chatting about? That doesn't make sense. But the amount that the education system has changed in the last 200 years is pretty zero, like the world, wow, is, why do we still learn about facts when all you need to do is Google? Like, I just don't, if you were designing an education system now, no one would make that shit up. Like, it's just stupid. But because it's what we've always had, and it's, what school is good at is carrying on the system how it is, because it teaches young people about how the world is, and then they go on and recreate that world, and then it goes around in a circle. So rather than teaching people about how to be like well-rounded human beings, it teaches people about, well, random shit, but then like also just how the world works at the moment. And I think, yeah, I mean, also for me, like the idea that you learn, like how Robin was saying, it's like a bubble, and like you don't, you're not a full human being until you kind of enter the world, like once you've left school. For me, it's also a weird idea that you learn while you're at school and then you're an adult and you stop learning. Like, it's like learning has kind of been co-opted by school into making people think about studying for qualifications, when learning is actually just like how you pick up information about how the world is, and then like it goes into your brain. And so why do we, sit in these classrooms for days on end and like learn stuff, and then you become an adult and suddenly you know everything, and then just doing a job, and then life just goes on.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. May jump in and then I'm in after.
Yeah, just another adding on to that, in terms of this question, another thing which I don't like is that idea that, like you say, Meg, that learning is like a single way process, like it's like a one-way drive road, and that the young people are there to learn from the adults, when actually, like sort of Robin was saying before, one of my clearest memories from school aren't learning when Elizabeth I was born, but is actually the conversations which I have with my teachers, and the conversations I had actually mostly, which were the most interesting ones and the most educative ones, were the ones about their lives as well as mine. And when we had like political discussions, or like discussions as a collective, and that is something that is like super that I don't like, because it ruins, you become sort of kind of like something meaningless, and again, that's what makes people drop out.
Really quickly, totally. Before you go, Robin, I was just gonna say, like, it's mad, like how is the times when you have the best, like the most fun, or feel like you're learning the most at school, the times when the teachers are like moving away from the curriculum? I don't know how many people have that, but like it's always in extracurricular clubs, or always in like the random conversations where teachers are not actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, that you have the best time and learn the most. Like, why does that not make people think, oh yeah, hang on, like why is this the best part?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything. And I think as we try and relate these to bigger social issues, and one of the reasons we want to talk about education is because we think it is foundational to so much that's fucked up with our world. Yeah? I mean, that's why Meg's decided to call her crew the Fuck School Crew that is bringing you this webinar today. But we mean that. So, for example, if we pick in what May, or you were saying there about the dynamic, but the student-teacher dynamic and the way it's represented in the UK, like you learn hierarchy, you learn intergenerational divide, intergenerational tension.
Yeah.
You learn that old people are there only to tell you things, maybe how the world works, not anything, but also there to punish you. Yeah, we have a punishment-based school system. There isn't any real incentive in school apart from obviously stuff around like exams and getting good grades, but that's so mental health inducing that no one goes near there. So it's like, if you're not going to do your work, you're going to get detention. Yeah? There's no like, let's engage in critical dialogue about how we want to construct an education system that you actually want to learn in. It's like, you don't want to learn, you go in to sit in a chair for a long time. And that dynamic, for me, breaks down so much ability for us to have intergenerational conversations. Because we relate adults to teachers and our friends, yeah? And even the way like school is stratified by age and these kind of things. But we have an issue right now where there is a young generation, you see it right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, there's a young generation who are looking at things very differently, yeah? They're ready to bring about radical change, they're having very different conversations, they're pushing stuff in a way that hasn't been pushed for a long time. You know, lots of these things are generational stuff. And if we don't know how to talk between generations, or even worse, which is more true really, is that young people feel, you know, inherently worse, you know, like they should be told what needs to happen by older people. If there isn't a conversation about how we talk together, how the different age groups exist in our society, how we all bring something, how we teach each other, then we're going to have a whole nother generation who feel like they can change the world, but get denied access to it because the adults are like, no, 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 sit down. What are you doing? You're so idealistic. Have you not learned anything in school? World shit. Get used to it. Kind of vibe. Megan?
I think another like key thing for me, well, I guess the whole, you know, the whole education system is built on success and failure. Some people have to fail for some people to succeed. That's how exams are graded. That's how the whole thing is structured. You know, in many ways that replicates our economy. But it's also just interesting to me because you look at the people who fail, and it's disproportionately people from working class backgrounds, people from black and brown communities. Like it's very obvious that there's a lot of structural issues going on there. Then the issue is that without this being properly questioned, because obviously people are talking about this, but without this being questioned as like a structural issue, what happens then is that the people that succeed are the people who didn't see those issues because, you know, it didn't affect them, and then they're the people that go on to design what the curriculum should be. They're the people that end up in power, you know. And people say this all the time.
Oh.
Okay.
Meg's disappeared.
We've lost Megan.
Man down.
1 second, everybody. Let's try again. So I'm just restarting the stream. This is great learning we're doing here, everybody. Thanks for sticking with me in this. Okay, we're back up. Perfect. Sorry, everybody. Okay, this is our first ever live stream as Radical Restart. We're really happy to be here with you, and we apologise for the tech issues. Going back to question 2, I think the final thing that I would say here is how, and I touched a little bit earlier on how I feel like school teaches you don't belong in the world. But I think beyond that also the way in which school is set up, the way in which we set up education is based very much around, well, we've been doing some reading of an incredible educationist called Paulo Freire from Brazil, and he describes it as a form of education that assumes the student knows nothing, that none of their life experience is important and deserves space in the classroom. Megan disappeared again for a second. So it's a form of education that is based upon other people's lives experience, other stuff, but it doesn't ever ask people to dig into their life experience and create lessons, dialogue, sessions around those. Yeah? So you have this dynamic where the teacher is assumed to know everything and the students are assumed to know nothing, which A, internalizes in the students the idea of their subservience, the idea that the things they do possess, like curiosity, imagination, those aren't important, and the things that are important are just knowing facts, which is what the teachers have. Yeah, so it internalizes that, but it also, I don't know, it's difficult to say, like, it also just reduces the students to the level of objects. It kills the like inherent personhood, because it's not asking you to come into the space as yourself. It's asking you to come into the space as a raw material to be processed by the school into something for a power you don't even understand, which is generally like whatever we want to see as the capitalist, white supremacist, patriarchal system that we live under. Yeah? So it like it really messes with you, and it kind of internalizes the understanding that you don't know anything, that you're not worth anything, that you don't exist in the world. And then even the final thing I really hate that Meg touched on earlier is it doesn't even teach you what learning is. Yeah? Like, it teaches you that learning is sitting down listening to someone else telling you stuff, when actually learning is just living in the world. We're learning all the time about everything. And that's why, for example, right now, when you go to someone, you say, wow, you're pretty racist. They go, oh, but where could I have possibly learned to be racist? No one sat me down and told me how to be racist. Because that's all we get taught that learning is, rather than this deeper cultural understanding of what it is to be a person, which is to learn all the time in every space we're in. And if we included all of those parts of school, so even what you learn about the fact that you're all sat on chairs when the teacher's standing up at the front, you know, what you learn about the fact that the vast majority of head teachers are still, you know, men, what you learn about the way in which, you know, kids racialized as black get, you know, disciplined in school as opposed to kids racialized as white. You know, these things don't get talked about, but they are the learnings, because that's just how humans learn. And we get lied to about that. And again, it means that young people think that they can't learn anything unless there's a teacher in the room. And it disregards all of your cultural knowledge, all of your kind of the stuff you're learning with your friends, the stuff you're learning at home. And it's like, that doesn't matter. Can you do Pythagoras? If not, get out of here. And it's just... Anyway, bores my blood. We're going to go on to question 3, and I'll jump back to you two. So question 3 is, how does, and maybe I touched on it slightly there, how does the education system relate to the current explosion of energy around anti-racism and the Black Lives Matter movement? Megan? May? Do you want to jump in on this?
I think, yeah, I'll jump in. I'm just reading the question again. Yeah, it's massive, obviously, is the answer. I think that the biggest thing for me at the moment, because I've been very involved, I've been going to a lot of protests at the moment, been involved in quite a few discussions. What's going on at the moment with Colston, with the statues, with Winston Churchill, all of that. Nice cat. Whose cat is that? Oh, hello. And the fact that, in a sense, I mean, from what I've looked at through the media and stuff, so Black Lives Matter, like you said, the energy, it's been rising up, like, as in getting more awareness and attention from specifically the white Western community, like, currently at the moment. And there was sort of not that much backlash. It was sort of like, just sort of like whisperings. Suddenly, statues toppling. Suddenly, people were trying to have a conversation about Britain, about its imperialism, and about why this country is literally built on systematic racism. And people just go apeshit. And that's the only way to put it, because the amount of backlash that people that have come up with, and to me it feels extraordinary, because toppling someone who literally owned people into a river, and bear in mind, it's not even him, it's the stone, like, recollection of him. Yeah, it's like, we're not killing anyone. So how that can be so incredibly, ridiculously sort of kind of like, people are mad. The whole of Britain is suddenly, everyone's involved in the conversation.
We'll be back up in a second.
May, you're frozen in a very heartfelt position. You're like,
oh no.
No, it's back, I think.
Okay, we're back. Apologies again, everybody. May,
Sorry.
carry on.
But with Black Lives Matter, and especially if you guys are this whole idea of education is revolution and people are finally doing their research, but you have to also understand that this is not a new problem, and this is the thing which makes me most mad and the energy that has come from this is the surprise. Anyone who is a person of colour and who has lived in Britain or Europe or almost anywhere in the world will not be surprised that this stuff is happening, because we've been experiencing it for our whole lives. So what's important in terms of education is that the fact that people are surprised that systematic racism exists, the fact that people are surprised that police brutality is happening when it has literally been happening every day for the past hundreds and hundreds of years, shows that people are not taught, and Western states and our government and all the rich white boys, as Megan said, do not want to teach why they are there and why Britain is here and the way it's built and the incredible guilt that this country would have to deal with if they actually have those conversations. So yeah. Sorry, bit of a rant.
Yeah, no. Yeah, just like 100% everything you said. I mean, the thing is that white supremacy is so foundational to our society that if it was actually challenged, like loads of shit would fall down. And so they try so hard to, like, you know, stop people questioning it, because that would kind of screw things up for them. You know, I think it's just, I mean, aside from how like messed up it is, it's kind of just hilarious that they built like a box around the Winston Churchill statue. And like, I don't know, I mean, did you see what, you know, Johnson said, like, we can't, you know, yeah, he was a bit, you know, had some problematic views, but like, we can't erase history. And then you're like, well, then what the fuck do we learn in our history lessons? Like, you know, that is literally erasing history or trying to erase history.
But also, sorry, Meg, but they have erased history. This is the biggest fucking contradiction, because we both did history A level, me and Meg. I have learned about the entirety of the Industrial Revolution. Guess how much of that fat textbook was on how the Industrial Revolution was funded? There was a
closer look. A closer look. That was what the box was titled.
Slavery. And you learn about the entire of Britain's wealth and the increase of democracy in Britain while it was literally being funded by the deportation of human beings. It's like, it's ridiculous. Yeah, anyway, I'm going to calm down.
Lily.
That, you know, because obviously, like, it's impossible because of, like, such, like, hideous things and, like, you know, how messed up the history of Britain is, that, you know, they haven't, you know, they're unable to completely deny all the facts, although they have definitely tried. You know, like, there's so many, like, you know, massacres and stuff which, if they, you know, records will burn and shit. But, you know, we still learn as a concept about slavery. We still learn as a concept about the British Empire. But the thing that, you know, we don't learn is how this relates so strongly to the way society is now. You know, it's like the way we learn about, like, Martin Luther King, and we're like, woo, yeah, you know, he was good, and, you know, someone racist shot him, but then it was okay because, you know, like, racism was solved. And it's like this idea that it's in the past, it's not related to now, and that, yeah, just that, you know, we're not upholding a system of white supremacy, which is obviously bullshit, because we are. And it's like how, you know, the education system, you know, there's lots of really good people that go into the education system, lots of teachers with the massive, you know, the intention to make the world a better place, you know. And my school, like, mine and May's school, they send, like, emails home this week saying, like, talking about how they want to be anti-racist, you know, like, trying to engage the students and stuff. And there's also brilliant stuff happening. But for me, it's like, if we don't question the whole structure of school and what it was always there for and what it does, which is, you know, creates, you know, before the age when people start school, I can't remember the statistic, but there's a massive difference in children's ability to engage in the classroom because of, like, personal background, and obviously because race and class are so closely intertwined in the UK. Like, that's already disproportionately affecting people from much more marginalized communities, and then school, like, just does that to the inequality, you know, in lots of cases.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can we have a conversation about dismantling white supremacy without dismantling the education system, and how can we have a conversation about dismantling the education system without dismantling white supremacy? Like, it's all so linked.
And also the way we go into those conversations, I think. Like, for example, like you're saying, May, like, people who are not racialized as white have a lot of information that they could be sharing with their classmates, sharing with their teachers, being held in spaces that were, you know, open for dialogue, having conversations. Like, that could be an aim of school, yeah, to provide spaces where young people could break down societal divides between them, because that's what you do. You know, you'd have 3 hours in the morning where you start chatting about whatever. How does anti-racism work in our society? How does white supremacy show up in the way that our institutions are organized, that the way we interrelate? And then you start talking about it, and people bring their personal experiences. And I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about that. If school assumes that the people in the classroom know nothing, then there is no difference in the experience between the rich young white kids and the poor kids from marginalized communities. Yeah? So they're seen, or at least the colorblind, which is just the most broken concept, the colorblind education system asks you to kind of, yeah, it kills that space within you. And I think if you come from a community that sees so much of yourself unrepresented in the education system, then the not allowing of your own story to come into it is even more violent. Yeah? It's even more dehumanizing. And then you as a person can't really exist in that space. And I think that's why you see so many, especially like young boys from working class, marginalized racial communities, just blow out of the school system. And there's a whole nother conversation about how the school system shouldn't be set up to tell most of the population that they're failures, because that feels like a wrong way to start people's lives. Fail. But I think we have to think about the level of transformation that will allow young people's personhood to come into the space. Because right now, it feels like the stuff around Black Lives Matter is just a huge call for people to matter. Obviously, Black Lives Matter, but especially those lives that are so violently marginalized, so silenced, to exist in the space. And we know they don't exist in school because, like you've said, the history gets erased, the people themselves, the young people, don't get valued. And so unless we change school so that young people are valued, we will continue to see these explosions where young people's pent-up energy goes, and it's Black Lives Matter right now. Next time it might be feminist movement. Time after that it could be a class-based stuff. You know, it's just like... Anyway, we also need to talk about Black British history, of course. I mean, Meg. And then we're going to get into some questions from the audience.
Also, for me, I just think it's like looking at how many, like you said before, Robin, like how many crises there are in the world at the moment. And also, especially considering, like, obviously there's deadlines in the fact that, like, people are dying every day, and that's, like, something you cannot ignore. But also in terms of, like, mass scale chaos from the climate crisis, which is coming kind of soon, is, like, this deadline is, like, young people are spending hours and hours and hours in school learning completely irrelevant information. Imagine if we could just actually spend all the time doing, like, look at the amazing stuff that's been coming out at the moment, like, you know, the protests completely organised by young people, you know, all over the country. And it's like, imagine if this is where our energy was going instead of being drained and put down by the education system. Like, how is that a more valuable learning experience than desperately trying to make the world a better place before it's too late?
Cat wants some.
Lily wants
lifestyle.
Okay, so we're going to jump in because we don't want to go too long. So we can jump into our last piece here, which is questions from the audience. So I've got one question coming in from Sadhana, who's a legend. We know Sadhana, she's cool. Big up Sadhana. Is ideally, and maybe Meg, you were starting to touch on it there. Ideally, what would you like education to look like? Who wants to jump in on that? And you don't have to spell the whole thing out, but maybe a few key things. I know some things that I really want to change.
Good question.
Great question, Sadhana.
Yeah.
So I think I'll jump in.
Go on.
I think we have to hold a delicate tension here when we start asking questions about solutions. Because it's very tempting. Well, I mean, one thing I'd just say first is that every time young people question anything, adults and old people will come forward and say, so what's the alternative? And I'd say there, you don't have to have an alternative to be pissed about something. That's just something I want to say to people. Yeah? If someone's punching you in the face, you don't have to come up with an alternative activity to convince them to stop doing it. Just tell them to stop. Yeah? Anyway. But when we chase solutions, we are basing it on the assumption that we have the levels of imagination, creativity, of spaces outside of the current, for example, take white supremacy. White supremacy is so utterly entrenched in the way we organise our economy, the way we organise our societies, the way we organise our healthcare, the way we organise our politics, that when we come up with solutions, if we're not owning that, we're going to come up with solutions that are different but are part of and replications of the same problem. And we'll be coming up with them from a space where I think we have to own at the moment. We have basically have a drought of imagination, of creativity, because of for example, the way the school system is set up to destroy imagination and instead regurgitate facts. Yeah. So instead of saying, there are also lots of things I could come up with now, but what I want to see us do is invest in the radical production of imagination, of creativity, of thinking outside the box that can come when you start making even minor changes about the school system. So forcing in dialogue, or as young people, we just create these spaces outside of the education system. Yeah, a bit like what we're trying to do with Radical Restart. We get together, we critique, we analyse, we vision, and we start to birth the kind of radical imaginations that can imagine something tangibly different. That isn't just, let's get climate change on the curriculum, but let's get rid of all exams, make it so 3 times a week the teachers have to sit down and get lectured by the students, that none of our classes are square anymore, they're all round, that there's a tree in the middle of every classroom so that you're like inherently connected with the actual world. Any of these kind of things. But basically, yeah, instead of going into solutions too quickly, hold this tension where we think about how can we create a flourishing of imagination, which in that space, that's where we'll be able to really start thinking about solutions, because that's the space where solutions will be truly different and truly incredible and different and powerful. Megan, jump in.
I also think that is a really important thing as well, to not think about it, because at the moment the way school is designed and the curriculum is very much like a government body designs what we learn. But I think it's so important that no one person is going to come up with an education system that works for everybody. We can see that right now, but it's that everybody's experiences are so different, and that what it needs is like collaboration of the people who are doing the learning themselves to sit down and think, what do we actually want to learn? What do we actually need to know? And if that happened now, maybe it would be like, we need to learn how to deal with mental health. We need to learn how to organize mass movements. We need to, learn how we can be, humble and not, be, white and fragile. Men need to learn how to deal with emotions, those kind of things. But like, what needs to come out of an understanding of the context of where you're at, because otherwise what's the point of school if you're not learning about the actual world and what you want to do with it. And it has to be like collaborative, because otherwise we'll just end up in the same mess, even if that one person is really cool.
Definitely. May, anything on that question? What would you like education to look like?
Yeah, I think it's in fact, I have a question for Robin. I'm gonna flip it.
Yeah, let's go.
Why specifically? I mean, you already explained yourself very eloquently, but why specifically do you think that the solutions, if me, Meg, and you just sat here and said, this is what we want school to look like, what makes those solutions different from the solutions of that imaginative energy which we're trying to create, and the solutions that come from that, if that makes any sense.
No, totally. And I think it's because, I think more maybe what I was trying to say was that if we create any solutions, they have to be within the framework of how do we promote that, yeah, for everyone. I think, you know, we're pretty cool. I'm not, you two are. How we could probably come up with some decent solutions that might change the conversation, yeah?
Yeah.
But I think there's also this, maybe the problem is my head is so much in the space of how you change things, how you build movements, how you don't allow the process of change and transformation to be co-opted by the power that currently is. So, for example, by teachers, by the system, how we push through changes. And also because, yeah. So I think, okay, we could definitely come up with some pretty cool changes.
But
those changes need to be more foundational, like Meg's talking about. They need to be presenting the opportunity for all the young people who come after us or with us to be part of that process of change making. Yeah?
Exactly.
It's that flourishing. Like, we also have to understand that once that process starts, there will be young people who are so much less conditioned than we are, or have had access to those spaces that we were denied, that they will come up with solutions that are far better than the ones we can have. Yeah? So not trying to get in that place of being like, this is what we think the school system needs to be like, we're going to fight for this, this, this. But instead, we're going to see what those foundational pieces, like dialogue in the classroom, like youth-controlled spaces, so student-owned spaces in schools, like the decapitalization of universities, that allow for the flourishing of creativity, so that you kind of create runaway exponential change, rather than like, we want to get it so everyone coming out of school can recite loads of facts about the British civil rights movement. We also want that to happen, but if it doesn't happen within then you're kind of just feeding slightly better information to the white supremacists.
Yeah.
And it's annoying doing that. That's all I mean. Anyway.
Yeah, well explained. That's what I just wanted to clarify. But yeah, got it.
No, cool. Okay, do we have any other questions from the wonderful 6 people who are watching us? I don't know who you are.
We love you.
Big up to you all. We'd love some questions in there.
Also, I'm aware that May has to go soon.
Yeah, otherwise
Yeah.
May's got to go to work. The grind.
I do.
Okay, there's nothing coming in. We've covered loads of different bits. We've had a bunch of tech issues. This was our first ever live stream. It's done now. That's perfect. I'd really like to just invite everyone who's watching, everyone who sees these clips, to come and get involved in Radical Restart. The point of the project is that, just as we've talked about here, we're trying to create spaces that are run by young people, for young people, about creating a flourishing of radical imagination, radical identity around our generation, kind of radical understandings of culture and movements that can start to push back in pretty real time against some of these big issues we're facing. We haven't really got into them here, or, I mean, we've connected, obviously, for example, especially with white supremacy, the issue of the moment, but how we connect with this generation's fight against the climate and ecological collapse, how we fight against patriarchy and the way it's entrenched, all of these different systems. So Radical Restart is just trying to create a space where we have these conversations, where we push towards solutions, towards movements, towards campaigns, and go from there. I'll just pass over to Megan and May for a quick sign-off. Anything you'd like to say? A final middle finger to school, if you want to. And then we'll end it there.
May?
Sign off. Okay. We really enjoyed it. Really enjoying, and I think, again, like what I feel like coming coming from all these discussions is that it can get very depressing. What's going on in central London right now is really depressing me, for example. But the biggest thing for me to remember, and what I believe is the first step, is for us to have these sort of conversations and just to talk, and especially talk to those people who we don't necessarily always agree with, and to like just always be constantly talking and exchanging views and arguing, because that's how we're going to be able to make this work. Also, quickly, this isn't a sign off really, this is more like instructions, sorry, but also in terms of Black Lives Matter, if you are getting interested in it or you're getting involved, I want to use any platform to remind people that it should not, we do not want white saviorism complex times two. It's about the amplification of Black voices, and if you want to help, that's the best way you can do it. And yeah, thank you, Meg.
Yeah, thanks, May. Yeah, I don't know. I guess kind of what you said, just like one of the things school is very good at telling us is that we don't know what the answers are and that we can't do all the things we want to do. And I think that's something so brilliant about young people, is like this, you know, idealism, or like, yeah, we've got to change this. And I guess it's just that, obviously, you know, listen to people's wisdom, but also if someone says something is impossible, maybe that means it's actually the right thing to try and do. And, you know, with this moment now as well, I guess everybody's like, oh, but, you know, it's impossible. How is, you know, toppling a statue going to change things? How are these ideas, you know, ever going to change things? But nothing was ever changed by people saying you can't change things, which just makes me laugh. I'm just like, yeah. So I don't know. And just, yeah, what May said, like, come from places of humility if you're someone with privilege.
Definitely. Amazing. Thanks, everyone, for coming along. We've got another live stream tomorrow. It'll be at 4:30. There we'll be talking about radical youth identity with some of our friends from Extinction Rebellion Youth Solidarity. So if we don't see you before then, we'll see you then. Signing off now. Check us in the next one.